Morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is the elusive obvious. We can become so admired or acclimated or conditioned to our patterns and habits and beliefs or circumstances that we have somehow managed to obscure the obvious. And even when there are very clear and easy solutions in quotes to issues that we're facing, we don't necessarily have the opportunity to recognize them because we're so enmeshed in in our habit. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. So good to have you joining us this morning. Before we get started, let's just take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop. And allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, we're talking about the elusive obvious. So, I just have a couple stories to share. And it really has to do, bottom line, what we're talking about is our conditioning and how our conditioning and our pattern thinking ensnares us into a limited experience of options and possibilities. So I was talking to somebody yesterday who has an exercise bike. Good morning, Cameron. Wonderful to have you here with us. Welcome, welcome. So I was speaking yesterday to somebody who has an exercise bike, and this bike they've had for quite some time, and it's showing indications that it's going to break down. And this person has some challenges with anxiety, nervousness, worry, and lots of us have lots of us worry, right? So worry is a pattern, by the way. It's just a patterned behavior. It's a habit, like so many other habits. But this person was really, they'd get on the exercise bike, and for the whole half hour that they're on the exercise bike, they're worrying about it breaking down. And they wanted to know how to get they wanted us to work on how to get over their worry. And I think this is such an interesting conversation. First of all, I think it's important to note that this person was exercising so that they could feel good. And what they were doing is they were practicing being anxious for a half hour every morning, right? while they're exercising. They're practicing being anxious. So it's kind of defeating a good part of the purpose for the exercise in the first place, which is an important thing to look at because we can practice ourselves into new states or perpetuating old states, right? So I think that that's not a minor detail here. And it is a detail that gave us leverage, I think, in exploring this, what seemed to me quite an obvious option. I said, well, I have a solution. And they said, really? And I said, yeah. They wanted to know what it was. And I said, get a new bike. They're in a position to be able to do that without any hardship. And what was fascinating to me, because I said it with a chuckle, just get a new bike. And it was a revelation. What do you mean get a new bike? Wow, that's a novel idea. So I likened it to having a splinter in your finger and trying to learn how to be comfortable with the splinter in your finger rather than taking out the splinter. It's we find ourselves suffering with circumstances that can be readily rectified. And the rectification just doesn't even occur to us because we're so used to suffering. And so that was the case with this person, is just being kind of acclimated to suffering and struggling and worrying. And it didn't occur to just remove the source of the worry. Well, it's not the source, given we're the source of the worry. But sometimes there are circumstances that we can alter that actually have a positive, powerful impact on our being, right? I mean, maybe it's not a bad idea to work on the pattern of worry, which we do, but in certain circumstances, we can shift our circumstances. And it was just so blatantly obvious and had completely not occurred to this person. And so it created a new possibility and a new opportunity for worry if they're not diligent about it too. But um, I, I I think it's just such a great story. And then there's the story of my brother. My brother had a boat and he had this plastic that would be like windscreens on the boat and weather protection. And it was delicate and in a way, I mean, he's had to store it flat and he stored it on the floor in his bedroom. So if anybody went into the bedroom, it's like, be careful of the isinglass. That's what this thing was called. And I just said to him, well, and he'd been doing this for years, apparently. I wasn't aware of it. We weren't living in the same place. And I said, well, why don't you just put it under the bed so that you don't have to walk all around it all the time? And it was a total revelation to him. Like, move it out of the way. He'd been living with it for so long that it never occurred to him that he could just move it out of the way. And we both laugh about it to this day. But how many of us have these things in our lives where we've created obstacles for ourselves to navigate around all the time without ever realizing that those obstacles can be readily removed? So sometimes it's us. I mean, I guess there's always a factor of it's us that we can learn to navigate the obstacles. But sometimes it's an obstacle and we can just release it or remove it. And this goes to an even deeper, more personal example from another person that I spoke with, who has a family history of heart disease, and all the men in their line, it's like common knowledge in their family that the men die early of heart disease. And we started exploring this because this person had an incident. And what was fascinating was that they said, it's just common knowledge in my family that the men die early. And maybe that's why we all work so hard to get so much done, because we know we're going to die early. And he said, it's so interesting that I never thought to question it, that I never challenged that belief, because our beliefs are self-fulfilling prophecies in so many ways. And so, for instance, in families with cancer running through the history of the family, and the belief that we get cancer, for example, how much of that is the belief, the strength of the belief, and how much of it is inevitability? And if we look into epigenetics, we can learn that these histories are not predictive, not universally predictive. We may have certain triggers or certain more probable responses to certain events, where something gets triggered and then something physically manifests. But how much of that is driven by belief? There's a great book called The Biology of Belief. And this is something that the epigenetics is the flexibility of genetics, that genetics aren't necessarily a sentence. And I wonder, as I think about that, is we talk about genetic expression as if our body and being is a mechanistic thing rather than a holistic thing that has energy and frequency to it. And the power of belief in itself, if you can imagine that there's a field of energy, that things exist first energetically before they manifest physically, that this field of belief that becomes generational and maybe encoded, the memory, the genetic memory, or the ancestral memory encoded in our blood, our bodies, our being, and energetically, that these patterns of belief can be dissolved. These patterns of belief can be transformed. And so what was fascinating with this person, with the family history of men only dying of heart issues, because, if it's genetic, why would it be sex delineated when it's heart issues? It's kind of an interesting thing, right? Good morning, Dido. So good to have you here this morning. Welcome. So, we did a process, and this person, what showed up is we're the people who built the pyramids. My people built the pyramids. And we ended up going back to, I don't know if I'm not making claims here about past lives or not, whether it's past life or a metaphor is not really that important in this case. But this person experienced themselves as a slave, and working very hard and being very committed and engaged in the construction of the pyramids, and kind of being blind to the suffering and torture that was occurring around them as a survival mechanism. And at night was when their heart was weeping. This person saw the heart, and the heart was weeping. And that was when it was able to process the sorrow, because to do that during the day would have meant being tortured or murdered. And so there was this deep, deep, deep sorrow. And then there was the experience of all the other family members allowing this person generationally to be the sorrow eater, so to speak, for the lineage. And then what arose was this terror of falling into that sorrow because it might be never ending. And so many of us have deep emotion that we spend our lives avoiding at all costs, because the experience of it would be something that might swallow us and consume us, and we might get lost in it and never find our way out. That's the story, is that the emotion would be all consuming and there would be nothing left of us if we were to face it. But the thing is that it's the warding off of the emotion, because the emotion is heavy. It's energy. And as we ward that off, what we're doing is driving it deeper and deeper until it becomes physical. And so it became clear that what our opportunity is to clear this emotion by stepping in it and through it together, to move through the depth of that sorrow, to release it, and release that whole field of energy, that field of belief, to be able to heal generations, just as this one person was sort of the sorrow eater for generations, to be able to change the history by relieving the burden of that grief. But the point here is that we become so hypnotized, so deeply at the effect of our beliefs and our circumstances, that but like we accept the conditions of the circumstances without question, when oftentimes the solution can be as simple as getting a new bike, for example, or putting the isinglass under the bed, to or challenging, why does it have to be that way? Or does it have to be that way? Or how else might it be able to be? And so we can look into ourselves and our lives. The challenge, I was going to say the problem, but is that we're so hypnotized by our circumstances that we don't even think to question them. And the thing about questioning is that it's disruptive. That's kind of the point. Or it can be, right? If we ask the right questions. And maybe one of the questions that we can ask is, how might I do this differently? One of the challenges with fixing things is that we often aren't looking at the cause. We're often misdirected in our efforts and energies in trying to address something. So the fixing something with the isinglass was to walk around it. The fixing something with the bike that isn't working was to adjust my attitude about the bike. No, move the isinglass, get rid of the bike. Address the physical heart, yes, but is that the cause? That's a symptom. And so we're often so fixated on the symptoms, believing that they're the cause, that we miss the point. And it's so important for us to be able to get to cause. So part of this fixing symptoms thing is that it's in so many ways often an attempt to control. What we're doing is we're band-aiding something, so it gives us some sense of power. We can fix this. I can fix that. But it often ends up with us addressing something, putting attention on something that ends up perpetuating the problem, or allows the problem, quote unquote, to perpetuate. Dido says, this resonates so much. I'm so glad. I mean, I think it's really important. Like, we're looking at this exists on all levels. It exists from our personal, emotional, physical state to government, to consciousness. It exists on all levels. And so when we question, we may arrive at new choices that can be disruptive. And taking the splinter out of your hand rather than learning to live with the splinter, which then becomes infected. This is a really good metaphor, actually, for how when we ignore emotion, it just goes deeper and deeper and gets manifest physically at some point. So rather than learning to live with the splinter, which would then get infected, which then could turn into sepsis, who knows, right? Take out the damn splinter. And if you keep getting splinters, then obviously the splinter's not the problem. Something else is happening that's creating those splinters in the first place, or that's allowing for that experience in the first place. And for example, with the bike, the other example was, would you ride in your car with bald tires waiting for one of them to blow out before you replace it? Hopefully not. Hopefully not. So we need to pay attention, and we need to pay attention now more than ever. And we need to ask questions that allow us to go beyond the hypnosis of our everyday lives, particularly when there's an atmosphere of fear and chaos and confusion. We need to be able to move beyond the obvious, or like to recognize the obvious. Pay attention to yourself, to your circumstances, to your patterns and habits, and how that propagates out. So the elusive obvious. Questions will help us get there. So that's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to please like, follow, and share Enlightened World Network and me. The links are in the description. And as always, it's a privilege and a pleasure to have the opportunity to share these morning musings on what it is to be human. So until next time, so much love to you.